Welcome to another Early Years Learning Hub podcast. My name is Jackie Ward, and I'm the founder and managing director of the Early Years Learning Hub. This podcast is part of our series titled Practice Sharing, and today we are joined by the lovely Catherine Lee, who we have had on our podcast before. Catherine is a huge inspiration to myself and many others. Catherine is the director at her educational consulting business. She has had an amazing career as an early childhood teacher, service director, speaker, and facilitator. And today we're going to be talking about what makes a great early childhood teacher or educator, because I think Catherine is a great early childhood teacher. So, Catherine, would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your professional journey?
I will. And thank you, Jackie, for those lovely words. I've been teaching for 43 years full time, and it's the joy of my life. It's something that I can't imagine that I would have felt or found this joy in any other profession. It's something that I feel very blessed. I started teaching when I was 21, and I was teaching at a centre where there was a lot of third generation unemployed families, a lot of very young single parents, a lot of problems. After 3 months of being there, I became the director and I stayed there for about 3 years. And the things that I learnt in that time have really supported me through the rest of my teaching career. And I really came to understand the value of supporting families and being part of a community while we're still supporting children as well. I then moved to I moved to a preschool and I taught there for about 5 years. And then I moved into early intervention after doing my postgraduate diploma in educational studies in early childhood special education. And I worked in the early intervention service for 10 and a half years. And then for the last 24 years, I've been in a very small preschool. And now I'm consulting and just still being able to be with children and with families and have wonderful discussions with educators. And for 17 and a half years, I worked part-time at TAFE, teaching in the certificate and the diploma course. And I've also worked for other organisations, speaking at conferences, KU and Gowrie, Macquarie Uni, Saman and Slattery. And I've had the pleasure of speaking and working within Australia in all our states and territories and also overseas.
Wow, what a stellar career. That sounds amazing. And I was thinking last time you were telling your story how lucky those Certificate 3 and diploma students would have been to have been, taught and mentored by you. I'm sure you shared lots of great practical examples. So
And
thank you for
I
sharing
think,
your story.
Jackie, I was very lucky too. I think there's something that you gain when you are learning alongside educators. I always learned something as well. So that was something that I feel very blessed to have had in my career as well.
I couldn't agree more. There's a lot to, it's amazing to have the career working with children and families, but then have the joy and the honour, I guess, of helping support other educators to be great educators is a great honour
Yes.
as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm hoping that we can draw on your expertise and you can share some wisdom for our listeners. So, what are some of the key things that you think are important to know for any new teachers and educators? What do you think is great to have in your toolkit?
I remember in my first year of teaching when I was challenged by the way other families lived, and it was very different to how I grew up. I remember I would go home and tell my parents some stories, and they would say, Catherine, not everybody grew up the same as you. Not everybody had this experience. And while I sort of knew, well, I did know that, it really was obvious when I was teaching, seeing that all families are different. Values, their experiences, their stories, their traumas, all those things influence them. And that was something that really supported me, realizing that these just aren't people who were in my community or my close-knit friendship group or in my family. They were very different and diverse. And that has helped me all the way through. And I think with that, being kind is one of the most important things in all my interactions. I try to be kind and honest and to bring joy not only to children, but to families and the community. And I think if you can honour teaching in that way, it supports you, but it also nourishes you. And hopefully that's what nourishes our children and families in the community too.
I love that message of kindness. I've got a little slogan that I actually had printed on some T-shirts that my husband and I wear, because if you be kind, be grateful, and that means you'll be happy, it's kind of
Yes,
automatic. And I think it's a lovely way to live your life, isn't it, with kindness as your
it
first
sure
point.
is.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I think it is easy, I think, when we work with children, because I think they are so naturally kind. I think maybe that sort of disappears as people get older, but when they're, little, and I think that's a really nice thing. And I couldn't agree with you more about the whole, perspective of different people's worldviews. That's something that's
Mhm.
really came to me many times throughout my career, not just people's cultural background, but also I had in the last sort of 5 years in a role that I was working with the Department of Education, is that I was really not aware of my metropolitan centric views about things, because I worked with a lot of schools and people that were remote and really remote communities, and how different the world is for a really remote community. And that, checking yourself on that idea that, yes, people live in different ways
Yes.
and we need to be mindful that that impacts their whole world and their whole experience. And we need to try and, I guess, accommodate for that and remember our way isn't the only way, kind of thing. So that's a really, really great tip, I think. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm interested to sort of hear about, 'cause obviously we're talking to you after many, many years of experience, myself included, and that, obviously your practice develops over time. So what are some of the things that you've noticed that you've gotten better at over time, and what do you think has supported you to improve and develop?
I think I've got better at everything. Just as I mentioned, that understanding of different layers of difference that we all have, like you mentioned, culturally, where you live, economically, values, views about the world. I've got better at understanding those. I've always accepted them, but having an understanding and what impact that has on families and on nurturing their children. I've got better at reaching out to the community. And I think every time that I was in a new community, with every change in a centre that I worked at, it's hard to start those connections again, but you just go back to what worked well in the other services. And I've learned that building a relationship is very much a two-way investment. It's not always ringing up and saying, oh, we'd like you to do this and this and this for us. We're, working with young children. Can you come? It's also, we'd like to offer our space for you to hold a next event. It's being open to giving as well as then receiving. And to do that, sometimes you need to offer something and give something first if you'd like to receive something. And I've got better at, I think, I really take my role as a teacher seriously, but really, really just spending time with children and just being with them and just have those opportunities to forget, time and thinking of what you have to do next. Knowing that you can put some documentation aside for a while. The best way to be engaged with children and to know them so that you can write something about them is to spend time with them, time involved in joyous play, and just, letting them know that that's what's important and that's what you value. And that's the one thing that I've come to value so much, because that has brought me so much joy. And I know that being with the children, they are really connected with you when you are present. And I think we all need to just check in on that,
Yeah,
particularly
that's a really good point. And it's a, a new buzzword, slow pedagogy, but it's very connected to that idea of
yeah.
just connecting with children and being with children, and as you say, that letting them know that they are the most important thing. And having conversations, because I think part of the problem, I'm not going to divert too much around the documentation tangle of web of problems there, but that idea of people not having anything to write if they haven't spent a lot of time with the children and really know them well, like start with that idea of trying to build up this picture of what this child is like, and what their rhythms are like, and who they like to play with, and what they like to do, and how they experiment, and how they used, how do they express their creativity, all of those things you get to know when you spend time with children. So I couldn't agree more. I think that's a really great thing to invest time with people. I was thinking, because I definitely think this is something that I've benefited from, that idea of, in roles that you've taken on, but getting ideas from other people, from, like you doing the facilitating, for CELA, or speaking at conferences, or, all the things that you've done in your career have definitely, I can imagine, helped you, like me, to know that was a great idea that I'm,
Yes.
getting from another professional. That idea of professional learning just doesn't come when you go to a course or do a course. It's actually that, connecting with other teachers and other people.
I think too, you need to leave spaces too where you are just connecting with your own family and your own community, your own friends. And a really important thing for me too is just being out in nature. We talk a lot about how nature is wonderful for our children, which it is, but it's also wonderful for people of all ages. And I get a lot of inspiration when I'm in nature about a lot of things. And I think one of the things too that I've got better at is nurturing myself, and which is really, really important, because particularly these days with the busyness, with the demands, and being an educator, we have to nurture ourselves too. And if you can nurture yourself and nurture the children at the same time, that would be wonderful. I was recently speaking and we were talking about going on walks outside for the benefit of the children, connecting with the community. But I also reframed it and thought, wouldn't it be amazing if that was seen as part of a good practice for the well-being of educators as well, that you go out? So looking at it in a more holistic way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I couldn't agree more. I feel so um, calm and soothed by my
Yeah.
time with nature and walking near bodies of water or trees or all those sorts of things. So, yeah, that's a really good point. And I think when you're looking after yourself in that way, you're less likely to get sick and, feel burnout and all those sorts of things. I think really having that distinction between work and home is really important, because I think if you're so easily connected to everything now, aren't you? If you've got your email on your phone, or
Oh,
I'm a
yes.
I'm a very a big stickler for keeping those two things separate, doing work at work and doing my home stuff at home. And that really started for me about, I used to take work home and never have time to do it anyway because I had a busy family life. Yeah, it served me well as well. It sounds like you're similar in that regard. Well, the other thing I wanted to talk about, because I've heard you say lots in our conversations about your critical reflections on things and thinking about that. So the importance of critical reflection, what role has that played in your practice and helped you to become the professional that you are?
I I think critical reflection is so important on many levels for all of us, in that we need to be thinking of whose voices are we hearing and whose voice are we paying attention to. With so many demands on us as educators, sometimes we aren't checking in on that, because sometimes it needs to be our voice that we listen to more. Other times it needs to be the children's voice or the family's voice or what's happening out there in the community. And critical reflection can really help with that. And they're just little prompts that I often would go through myself, write up for whichever teams I was working with, so that people could see we need to look at all those voices, not just one.
Mm.
I also think that critical reflection can really help us make decisions that are really based in professionalism, kindness, ethics, values, and going back to our own personal philosophy of teaching, but also the centre philosophy, and making sure there's a match there. And it can really support us, and I've found this all the way through my career, on what is our why. Why are we doing this? Why is
Mm.
this important? Why aren't we doing this other thing? Why have we chosen this? So that we all that we're working with are on the same page about practices. And there needs to be lots and lots of discussions around a lot of things, and they need to be over a period of time. Critical reflection just doesn't happen for 10 minutes at the end of the day. It's built on into conversations that you might have at a more formal professional development opportunity or in a staff meeting, plus in those short times where you get to talk to each other, before the children arrive or after. And all of that coming together is going to then really support maybe deep change, and a deep understanding of what your why is, so that you can then talk about that to families and to the community. And also, that's critical reflection over time is the way to support ongoing change.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm a very big fan of people understanding why they're doing something,
Yes.
and also questioning. I would add probably another layer where I say, do we need to be doing all these extra bits if we're finding
Oh, yes.
something burdensome? Like, let's cut all those out if they don't really contribute to our why or they're not really aligned with, professional standards or ethics or whatever else. I'm a big fan of cutting out all the fluff because
Yeah.
I think
Mm.
that's what makes everyone so stressed. They're doing all these things, they're taking all these photos, they're doing cut that out, and then you might have some more time to find the joy in your work and just focus in on the things that really matter.
Yes. And critically reflect if you want to bring something in, it's a little bit like decluttering, isn't it?
Yeah.
Something has to go out
Yeah.
because you can't keep adding all these layers and layers and expectations. You just can't do all those things. And some
Yeah.
those things don't really bring the quality that you're looking for.
I had a conversation with a colleague just last week where she was saying that we'd had a prac student in and she mentioned that they'd done this and they do this and at the end of the day, and I said, I said straight out, I said, that sounds amazing, but I know how hard it is for us to get the pictures from our iPads to the computer and then put that. I said, I just don't have time for that. I'm not interested. And she probably was a bit shocked and taken aback. But I thought, you know what, that would take me so much time away from the children to
Yes,
do
yes.
that, or I would have to do it in my personal time. And I'm like, well, I think I would rather document children's learning or do some critical reflections. I'd rather spend my time doing other things. And I think that's a really, really important thing that we need to learn about critical reflection, is that it helps us to stay on track as well. Like there's so many benefits to it.
Mm.
I can't think of what my work life would be without really doing some deep critical reflections on what the things that are important for me to focus in on.
I think it does enrich your practices, doesn't it? And it
Yeah.
also enriches you, knowing your why. It
Yeah,
gives you like a moral compass, and it's another compass to support you.
in your professionalism,
Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah.
agree. I'm interested to talk to you a little bit about continuous improvement. So, are there still things that you want to do better as a teacher or, as an early childhood professional? Are there still things that you're working on?
Yes, I'd like to know more about technology. um, I've had children who've been able to show me how to send photos that they've taken with the microscope to the iPad, and then from the iPad to the printer. And I remember it was about 18 months ago, a child said, "You need to learn this." And I thought, yes, I do. I need to learn this. I just want to learn how to be really the best person I can be and bring that best person to children all the time. And with that, I keep going back to kindness and fairness, and they're really, really important. I want to be able to show children that I value those things so I can support them. And I want to be a stronger advocate,
Mhm.
particularly at the moment with what's happening in early childhood.
Mm.
And it's a balance between reading all the things that has been coming out, which I have tried to read everything that has been coming out, and those things that really do make you so sad when you
Mm.
hear what's happening. And then how can I support this? And in a way that is going to make change. And at the moment, I think just the best way I can do that is to be such a good, strong model on how to protect our children. And I remember just a few months ago, I was just walking into my local IGA, and somebody in my community I didn't even get in the door, pulled me up and said, "I knew you'd be the person I need to talk to. What do you think is happening? What can I do? Should this change?" And she had some very strong views, and I found myself talking to her for 45 minutes. I had to move inside the shop. And by that time, two other neighbours had joined in the conversation. And I thought, that is something that I can do. Even though I was just ducking in to get some things for dinner, I can stand there and have this really deep conversation because it's important. And that's how I can honor children and care for them and nurture them, protect them by giving my opinion. Because we all know at the moment there's lots of different things that people are putting into practice. And some of those things are bias against some of our educators.
Mm.
We need to stand up for everybody, our children, but also for those who are doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I would agree on that because I had the same thinking. What can I do? How can I contribute? And I thought about a lot of different things, but I think one of the things that we can have the biggest impact, I think, is by explaining to our community what does high quality early childhood education and care look like? What does it mean to be, implementing great pedagogy? We're the ones that need to translate that, if you like, to the broader community, because I think, if you don't have that background, it's not clear. Those things are not obvious. What you're doing and all the conversations that you have with children, we need to translate is basically what I'm saying. So, yeah, I think that's a really important one. And I would agree with you too. I'm always thinking about, well, how can I support children implementing, really rich and meaningful creative arts experiences, and how can I empower children to be more engaged in digital technologies in ways that they can do independently, rather than me looking something up on a whiteboard, which is, that's something we're doing to engage with digital technologies, but always thinking about what could I do, sustained shared conversations is one that I always grapple with. How can I have more of those and, all sorts of things. But I think that to me is what makes teaching a great profession, is that commitment to always trying to be better at what you do and hone your craft.
Yes, I'm very interested in big pedagogy, not just looking at small ideas on big ideas. It's something that I think has been spoken about a lot through Reggio Emilia, and though that principle that children have big ideas, and role then is to create that big pedagogy to honour them.
That's great. Just a little question here about if there's anything that you would do differently, I guess, in your career or in your work, anything that you sort of think that you might have made a change if you'd have done it differently?
I think sometimes there's so many things. One of the things I was very much criticised when I worked in early intervention, that I was too emotional and became too emotionally invested in some of the families and the children's lives. And I remember that I was so hurt by that. And then I thought about it and I thought that was important to be invested like that, because without that kindness, without that concern, without that really wanting the best for those children, those families, they wouldn't have got it if I just thought, oh, well, the school can, when they go off to school, the school can deal with that, or that centre could still keep isolating that child and not including them in the group because, yes, that's better for everybody. If I wasn't as invested as I was, I don't think those children and families would have had as good outcomes, and that was part of my responsibility and my own code of ethics. So one of the things that I would have done differently is not paid too much attention to what I was told. And I think, we're making decisions all the time as educators that do impact children and families, community, policy. I think we do have to have an emotional investment
Yeah,
for the
that's a
best.
really good point. And not giving the opinion of others as much weight, but good to reflect on that and think about it, particularly if you were experiencing burnout. It might have been a good thing to say, well, maybe I need to find the right balance. But yeah, if it wasn't right, then you don't need to listen to it, do you? So that's a great story. I love that. So I think you've probably already talked about this, but if there's anything else that you'd like to share. So I think it's a privilege to be part of this beautiful early childhood profession, but what does being an early childhood teacher mean to you?
So much. It's been a really important part of my life. I feel that the joy that the children and teaching has given me has carried me through my life and carried me through in really hard times as well. There's always little stories that I remember. I know that it's important that I'm there to support children, but I know in lots of times in my life they supported me too. And that has been beautiful. I remember when I broke my leg a few years ago when I was at when I was teaching, and I couldn't move and I was on the ground, and a little girl came up to me and said, "You're not going to die, are you?" And I remember thinking, I hadn't thought of that. And I said, "I hope not." And she said, "Don't, because we need you." I was just like, oh, yes, I'm needed. I think I know I bring joy to children, and
Yeah.
that's something I strive to do, but they have brought so much to me, love and nurturing. It means a great deal that I've been able to be so privileged to be part of their lives and their families' lives.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it makes me a little bit teary too. I think
Yeah.
the same. And even when I've held roles where I haven't worked directly with children, I've always had children at the centre of what we were doing and helping,
Yes.
teachers be great teachers so that they are going to be able to do the best job that they can do for those children that they work with. And yeah, I noted what you said there. You've had some challenges over the years. Nothing is smooth sailing. There's been some highs and some lows. But I think that's the great thing about caring about what you do and being invested in your profession is that it tides you over through the challenging times, doesn't it?
It-
Well, that is amazing. I'm going to wrap us up there. Is there anything that you would like to? We talked about your consulting business. Would you like to tell our listeners where they can find you and how to connect with you?
Yes, thank you, Jackie. You can find me on Facebook and on LinkedIn, Catherine Lee, Educational Consultant. And as I said, as well as that joy of being with children, working and learning alongside educators brings me great joy. So please reach out and contact me. And I just think I have had an amazing career, and I think it's something that is so just embedded in my life, being part of communities where we are nurturing our children, that even if when I retire, I will still be connected with children. And I just hope that that is a joy that all educators can find.
Yes, yeah, I do too. That's my wish for everyone to enjoy their profession as much as we do. So, this has been another episode of the Early Years Learning Hub podcast. Thank you so much, Catherine, for joining us, and hopefully, our listeners will join in next time for our next episode.